Why did the captain sound different this time? That was the first thought that reached her through the haze of half-sleep. Claire stirred in row 12, earbuds silent now against the faint hum of the aircraft. For a moment she thought it was nothing, just the cadence of a voice announcing turbulence or a change in altitude. But the pause between words, the carefully measured calm, carried a weight she could not mistake. "If there is a licensed pilot on board," the voice said again, steady yet edged, "please make yourself known to a member of the crew immediately." The words slipped through the cabin like a sharp wind. Conversations froze, tablets lowered, and books hung midair as people looked around. Nobody moved. No call buttons lit. Only the rising tide of unease filled the silence. Claire blinked, pushing back her hood. Her breath caught, though she kept her face neutral, calm. She had spent years training herself to control expression, to hide what her mind already knew: something was wrong, deeply wrong. A woman in the row ahead leaned toward her husband, whispering in disbelief. Did he say a pilot? Why would he need that? The husband shook his head, eyes darting nervously toward the front of the plane. Across the aisle, a businessman who had barely looked up from his laptop now stared blankly at the call light above him, as though willing someone else to press it. No one did. Claire's heart drummed with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years, the old thud of adrenaline that once came before a mission briefing, before wheels up into hostile skis. She boarded this flight wanting nothing but silence, anonymity. She was content to be the woman in row 12, hoodie pulled low, forgotten in the crowd of travelers. But silence wasn't hers anymore, not after that announcement. The captain's voice returned now. "If there are any licensed pilots on board, please ring your call button." The second request stripped the last veil of routine. Children stilled under their parents' touch. The college kid at the window pulled out an earbud, eyes wide, whispering, "Is the plane in trouble?" Laughter came from somewhere in the back, brittle and nervous, the kind that wasn't really laughter at all. People shifted in their seats, whispers spreading like sparks. Claire sat, earbuds coiled into her pocket. She wasn't moving yet, discipline held her still. But her mind had already begun its quiet calculations. A co-pilot down, a sudden illness, maybe worse. She drilled those scenarios until they were muscle memory. And yet she remained silent, her breath shallow. 10 years in cockpits, 10 years as a pilot trusted with lives, and here she was frozen by the simple weight of choice. Reveal herself or not. A flight attendant came down the aisle quickly, her expression calm but clipped, her steps too fast to disguise. She stopped at row 8, bent down, asked a question Claire couldn't hear. The man shook his head. She moved on, row by row, searching. Claire tracked her every movement, the flicker in her eyes, the urgency in the lines of her shoulders. She had seen soldiers mask fear before. This was the same mask. Her pulse tightened. The businessman leaned out as the attendant passed, his voice sharp. "What's happening? Why does the captain need another pilot?" Her practiced smile faltered just slightly before she answered. "We're just verifying if any passengers on board have flight experience," she said, then moved on quickly before questions stacked higher than she could manage. Her words didn't fool Claire. Precaution, verification, buffer words chosen to soothe. In her training, they called it masking, the words leaders used when the truth would tip a crowd into panic. She read it instantly. Something serious was unfolding beyond the locked cockpit door. The call repeated, third time. This time the captain's steadiness frayed at the edges. "I repeat, if there are any licensed pilots on this aircraft, please identify yourselves immediately." It was no longer a request, it was a plea. The air shifted. Conversations no longer whispered but rippled openly. "What does that mean?" someone asked aloud. "Is the plane in trouble?" Another voice, sharper. "Why hasn't anyone stood up yet?" The flight attendants moved faster now, their masks cracking at the seams. One pressed the intercom. "Ladies, and please remain calm. We are requesting this purely as a precaution." But her voice wavered mid-sentence, a hairline fracture in her control. People noticed. Eyes widened. Fear fed on the silence between words. Claire inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the old ritual: assess, plan, act. She could almost hear her commander's voice from years ago. When you're the one who can move, you don't wait for someone else. But memory was heavy. Memory dragged. She thought of why she'd walked away, why she'd sworn never again. The accident, the night she lost her wingman, the one decision that clawed at her still. Her chest tightened. The attendant reached her row. She crouched low, keeping her tone even. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you have any flight experience?" For a heartbeat, Claire considered lying. She could shake her head, let the search move on, let someone else carry the weight. But then she saw it, the strain in the attendant's eyes, the desperation she was barely masking. She thought of the captain's voice breaking through the intercom, the ripple of fear among 200 strangers. She met the attendant's gaze. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "Yes." The attendant blinked, surprised. "Are you a licensed pilot?" Claire nodded once, shoulders squaring. "United States Air Force, 10 years, multi-aircraft certified, current." The relief that flashed across the attendant's face was almost painful to witness. She leaned close, whispered urgently, "Please stay here. I'll inform the captain immediately." Then she hurried forward, faster than before. Around her, passengers stared. The businessman's laptop sat forgotten as he gawked openly. The college student whispered too loudly, "She's a pilot," and within moments the words traveled row by row, reshaped with each retelling. "She's military. She's certified. She's from the Air Force." Claire felt the weight of their eyes pressing down on her, but she didn't flinch. She had been watched before, under fire, under scrutiny. Attention was nothing new. What mattered was the cockpit door ahead and the truth waiting behind it. The intercom chimed again. "Cabin crew, prepare for a briefing." Moments later, the attendant returned, face pale but determined. She leaned close to Claire. "The captain needs you in the cockpit immediately." Claire unbuckled her seat belt in one smooth motion. She rose from row 12 with quiet decisiveness, hoodie falling loose over her shoulders. Passengers turned, watching, some with hope, others with disbelief. She didn't meet their eyes. She moved steadily down the aisle, her mind already shifting into the old rhythm. Assess, plan, act. The cockpit door loomed ahead, guarded by a flight attendant whose jaw was tight, eyes sharp. He stepped aside, nodded once. Claire nodded back, then crossed the threshold. The door closed behind her with a solid click, sealing her back into a world she had thought she'd left behind. The smell hit her first: warm electronics, recycled air, the faint metallic tang of sweat under strain. The panels glowed softly, lights in green and amber, instruments alive with their ceaseless data. The captain sat rigid, shoulders tense, one hand locked on the yoke. His eyes snapped to her, wide with relief and fatigue. Beside him, the co-pilot slumped motionless, oxygen mask loose against his face, chest rising unevenly. Alive but gone to the world. "Thank God," the captain rasped. "They said you're certified." Claire slid into the right-hand seat, her voice firm. "Yes, United States Air Force, F-16s, C-130s, sims on civilian heavies. I can help." The captain's shoulders sagged just slightly, as if he had been holding his breath for too long. "Co-pilot collapsed 20 minutes ago. Likely cardiac. I've been managing alone, but we've got weather ahead and a medical emergency on board. I can't juggle both." Her eyes scanned the instruments. Altitude steady, autopilot engaged, but deviations in crosswinds already forming. Her hands itched to move, but she forced herself to pause to see the whole picture. "Medical for him?" she asked, glancing at the co-pilot. "Crew's tending, but he's out. We need to divert." She nodded once, efficient. "Agreed. What's your nearest alternate?" He rattled off the details. Without hesitation, Claire keyed the radio. "Center, this is Flight 482 declaring medical emergency. Request immediate vectors to alternate." Her voice carried calm precision, the kind that belonged in cockpits, not cabins. Muscle memory surged back like a tide. Switches, dials, calls. The captain glanced at her, shoulders easing as the burden shifted. "You weren't listed as crew," he said, still stunned, even as he adjusted for descent prep. "I wasn't," she answered quietly, adjusting a dial. "Row 12. I wasn't planning to fly today." A short, incredulous laugh escaped him. "Hell of a day to change your mind." For the first time, she allowed herself the smallest smile, but behind it, old ghosts stirred. He didn't know why she left the Air Force. He didn't know the accident that haunted her nights or the silence she carried like armor. He didn't know she had sworn never again. And yet here she was, hands moving instinctively across controls, voice steady in the storm, returning to the role she thought she had buried. She was no longer a passenger in row 12. She was a pilot again. The cabin behind her was sealed away now, but she could almost feel its weight pressing against the cockpit door. 200 strangers, restless and uncertain, whispering about the woman in row 12. She couldn't hear them, but she knew. She'd flown long enough to understand passengers, their fears, their fragile trust. The moment the captain had asked for another pilot, that trust had cracked. And the moment she stood, their hopes latched onto her whether she wanted them or not. Her headset settled over her ears with an old familiarity that stung. The soundscape rushed in, engine hums, autopilot chimes, the clipped rhythm of air traffic control. It was a music she hadn't heard in years, but every note fell into place inside her. Claire steadied her breathing, letting training guide her hands. "Vectors confirmed," ATC replied. "Flight 482, descend and maintain flight level 240. Expect approach vectors in 15. "Roger," Claire answered, twisting the autopilot dial smoothly. The aircraft began its gradual descent, engines shifting pitch. The captain glanced sideways at her, his face drawn but easing slightly. "Feels like I've got my right hand back," he muttered. She didn't reply. She just nodded, her focus sharp, eyes flicking between instruments, horizon, radar. Words weren't necessary. Her presence was enough. The co-pilot groaned faintly beside them, chest heaving under the oxygen mask, but remained unconscious. A flight attendant slipped in briefly to check, her eyes darting between the slumped figure and Claire before she retreated back to the cabin. Claire caught the flicker of awe before the door closed again. She blocked it out. She couldn't afford to think about passengers' admiration or their fear. What mattered was the rhythm of descent, the coordination with ATC, the steady balance of metal and sky. She knew too well how fragile control was. A single lapse, a single mistake, and everything unraveled. "You've flown heavies before?" the captain asked after a beat, his voice taut but curious, maybe to steady himself as much as to fill the silence. "C-130s, she confirmed, scanning gauges. "Different handling, same principles." He gave a short whistle. "Fighters too," they said. "You're overqualified for this seat." Claire's lips pressed into the faintest smile. "Overqualified," she echoed, but the word snagged in her chest. She remembered the last time she sat in a cockpit like this. The alarms, the spiraling descent, her wingman's silence in her headset. That night had ended with wreckage and grief, and her promise never to fly again. She had buried that part of herself, told herself the skis had taken too much. Yet here she was. The storm radar bloomed with colors, green, yellow, streaks of red forming just south of their approach path. Claire tapped the screen lightly. "We'll skirt the edge. Vectors are clean for now, but if this cell grows, we'll need a 5-degree correction north." The captain studied her with a glance, brow furrowing. "You've done this before." "More times than I can count." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but her stomach coiled. Each time had left its own mark, and now fate had pulled her back into it. The plane jolted suddenly, a pocket of turbulence shoving them downward. The captain's hands tightened on the yoke. Gasps rippled faintly from the cabin behind them. Claire's hand brushed the controls, steady, not to override but to reassure. "Correcting," she murmured. "Back on glide slope. Let her fly." The captain exhaled sharply, following her cues. She felt his tension, his nerves stretched thin from 20 minutes alone. With her here, he leaned just slightly into her steadiness. She didn't need to say it out loud. She had his back. The intercom buzzed. A flight attendant's voice broke through, subdued but strained. "Captain, passengers are asking for updates. Should we say anything more?" The captain hesitated, eyes flicking toward Claire. She gave a single nod. "I'll take it." He handed her the handset. She pressed the button, hearing the faint pop as the cabin line opened. For a moment, silence filled her ears, as though every soul behind the door held their breath. "Ladies and," she began, her voice calm, deliberate, each word chosen with care. "This is Claire speaking. Some of you saw me leave row 12 earlier. I am a licensed military pilot assisting the captain now. We are managing a medical situation, but the aircraft is under control. We will be diverting to a nearby airport, and the crew has everything in hand. Please remain calm and follow their instructions. We'll be on the ground safely soon." She released the button. Silence held for a beat, then the background murmur of the cabin resumed, lower now, steadier. Relief threaded through it. "Good delivery," the captain said, his voice quieter. "You've done this before, too." "Yes." She replaced the handset gently, but inside her chest tightened with the truth she didn't speak. She'd done this too many times, and each time had taken something from her. Tonight was no different. "Descending through 18,000, she reported. Her voice had slipped back into its old cadence, clipped, precise, stripped of hesitation. It was as though she had never left. The captain adjusted heading, his focus sharper now. He seemed to breathe easier with her anchoring him. Claire knew the weight he carried. Alone, the burden was crushing. Shared, it became bearable. She had carried that weight before in combat zones, ferrying soldiers through hostile skis. The fear of passengers was different, quieter, but no less real. They needed steadiness as much as oxygen. And tonight, steadiness meant her. She checked the radar again. "Storm cells are building faster than forecast. We'll need to watch for shear on approach." The captain nodded. "Copy." His voice carried trust now, the kind forged in crisis, not years. In the cabin, passengers shifted with each tremor of turbulence. Some clutched armrests, some whispered prayers. The businessman in row 12 stared at the cockpit door, still processing that the quiet woman beside him had been military all along. Children fidgeted, their parents soothing them with shaky hands. The story spread faster than fear. The woman in row 12, the pilot, was in control now. And though none of them could see her hands moving across the instruments, they felt her presence. Claire ignored what lay beyond the door. She tuned out the what-ifs, the weight of 200 lives. Instead, she anchored herself to the instruments, the data, the rhythm of descent. Numbers didn't panic. Gauges didn't speculate. They only told the truth. Altitude 14,000, speed within limits, vectors steady. She announced each detail, voice calm, grounding them both. The captain risked a glance at her, something like gratitude flickering in his tired eyes. "I have to ask," he murmured, "why row 12? Why not still here in a cockpit day after day?" Her fingers hovered over the throttle, adjusting minutely. She didn't look at him. "Sometimes the sky takes more than it gives back," she said softly. He didn't push. He didn't need to. The cockpit wasn't a place for confessions. But the truth of her words hung there between them, a glimpse into the weight she carried. ATC crackled in her ear again. "Flight 482, turn left heading 255, descend to 6,000. Expect vectors for final." "Roger," Claire answered crisply, repeating the commands as her hands adjusted the autopilot. The descent steepened, the hum of engines shifting lower. Rain began to streak the windshield, faint at first, then heavier until the wipers struggled to keep pace. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the cockpit in brief flashes. The storm had arrived. "Keep your scan up," she reminded the captain quietly. "Trust your instruments, we'll break through soon." He nodded, his breathing steadier now, anchored by her calm. She could feel it, the bond forming, the rhythm of teamwork reawakening in her veins. They had flown together for less than an hour, yet they moved like a crew forged by years. Corrections, acknowledgments, the seamless rhythm that meant survival. The cabin rattled as turbulence thickened. Passengers clutched, but Claire's voice on the intercom echoed in their memory. Everything was under control. Her words had planted something stronger than fear, belief. Inside the cockpit, she leaned forward, studying the navigation screen. The beacon pulsed, guiding them in. She narrowed her eyes. Approach in 5. The captain's jaw tightened. Let's bring her home. She placed her hand lightly on the controls, not to take over but to steady. We will. Rain hammered the fuselage. The storm clawed at them, trying to push them off course. But Claire was back where she belonged, hands on the instruments, eyes sharp, voice calm. She had boarded this flight as a passenger, faceless among strangers. Now she was the reason they would see the ground again. And for the first time in years, as thunder rolled around her and the runway beacon glowed faintly on the screen, she felt it return. The undeniable truth that no matter how far she tried to run, she would always be a pilot. The storm didn't wait politely at the horizon. It swallowed them whole. Sheets of rain slammed the windshield, wipers slashing furiously, a hollow rhythm against the growl of engines. Lightning ripped across the sky in sudden, merciless flashes that painted the cockpit in stark white. For an instant, Claire saw the captain's jaw clenched tight, the veins in his hands taut against the yoke. Then the light faded and darkness returned, leaving only the glow of instruments to guide them. The aircraft shuddered hard, dropping several hundred feet in a stomach-turning lurch. Gasps rippled faintly through the cabin behind them. 200 people reminded all at once that their lives depended on invisible hands. Claire's grip tightened just slightly on the throttle, anchoring them through the plunge. Correcting, she said calmly, her voice cutting through the roar. Hold her steady, small inputs. The captain obeyed, jaw tight, sweat glistening on his temple. His nerves showed in the strain of his movements, overcorrections born from tension. Claire's hand reached across, brushing lightly against the yoke, not to seize control but to ground him, to remind him he wasn't alone. Let the plane fly, she murmured, steady. Don't fight her too much. He exhaled, shoulders loosening slightly. The nose leveled, the descent steadied. The instruments smoothed into their rhythm again. Rain hammered the fuselage like an endless drum, drowning out almost everything else. But Claire didn't need sight. She trusted the dials, the gauges, the glowing indicators whispering truths only pilots heard. Speed, altitude, glide slope, all within tolerance for now. Descent through 9,000, she reported, her tone clipped, automatic. Winds variable 12, expecting sheer on approach. Copy. The captain's voice was rough but steadier, steadied by hers. A burst of static crackled in her headset. ATC's voice followed, brisk and precise. Flight 482, descend and maintain 3,000. Cleared for ILS approach, runway 36. Claire acknowledged instantly. Her fingers moved with muscle memory across the autopilot panel, adjusting, fine-tuning. She didn't need to think. Her body remembered. The captain glanced sideways at her, his eyes darting over her movements. You're too calm for this, he muttered. Claire didn't answer. Calm wasn't what she felt. Beneath her hoodie, her heart hammered, blood rushing with old ghosts. Her mind flickered back to another cockpit, another night when lightning slashed across the sky. She remembered the alarm screaming, the violent roll of an aircraft buckling under failure. She remembered her wingman's voice cutting mid-sentence, gone into static. She blinked hard, forcing the memory back into its box. Not now. Another jolt rattled the cabin, the plane shivering under crosswinds. A warning chime sounded, sharp and insistent. The captain flinched, but Claire's voice cut across it before panic could creep in. Stabilizer warning, compensating, trim adjusted, hold your line. The warning silenced, the plane steadied again. In the cabin, whispers churned like waves. Passengers clutched armrests, parents pulled children. but many remembered her voice earlier, calm over the intercom, promising control. The woman from row 12 was up front now, guiding them through the storm. They couldn't see her, but they believed her. Belief held them together as much as the steel bolts in the fuselage. Claire tuned them out. She couldn't think about the cabin, couldn't think about the weight of eyes waiting behind the door. Her focus was here. The instruments, the storm, the narrow window of control. "Speed steady at 250, she reported. Her eyes scanned ceaselessly, her voice anchoring the captain in rhythm. "Alive, glide slope capturing." The captain's knuckles were white again, his breathing shallow. Claire caught the tremor in his left hand, the same tremor she'd seen earlier. He was good, better than good, but fatigue clawed at him. 20 minutes alone had nearly broken him. Now in the storm, the cracks widened. "Talk to me," she said quietly, firm but steady. "Breathe, we'll ride her in together." He nodded, drawing in air, exhaling shakily. He glanced at her again, the gratitude in his eyes unspoken but raw. "You shouldn't have been in row 12, he said softly. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Not because she disagreed, but because the truth of it cut too deep. She shouldn't have been in row 12. She shouldn't have been anywhere near a cockpit again. She had walked away for a reason. But here she was. ATC's voice pierced through again. "Flight 482, report established on the ILS." "Roger," Claire replied crisply. "Flight 482 established." She leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the faint glow on the navigation screen. The runway beacon pulsed steadily now, their invisible lifeline in the storm. "This is it," she murmured. The captain's grip tightened again. "Let's bring her home." Claire's hand brushed the flaps lever. "Flaps 15." He moved without hesitation. The aircraft's frame shifted, shuddering slightly in the turbulent air. She tracked the glide slope, eyes locked, every muscle tuned to precision. Lightning split the clouds again, closer this time, illuminating sheets of rain like falling silver threads. For a moment, she saw her own reflection in the cockpit glass, hood fallen back, eyes hard, jaw set. Not the woman who boarded quietly with a carry-on, but the pilot she had once been, reborn under fire. The aircraft rocked violently again, alarms threatening to sound. The captain swore under his breath, fighting to keep alignment. "You're drifting right," Claire snapped, her voice low but commanding. "Correct with rudder, small inputs, that's it, hold steady." He obeyed, the nose correcting, the glide slope realigning. The warning silenced again. Her pulse pounded, but her voice remained even. "Altitude 3000, glide slope captured, final in sight soon." Still the runway lay hidden, swallowed in the storm. Only instruments told the truth now, and Claire clung to them like lifelines. The intercom buzzed, startling them both. A flight attendant's voice, hushed but urgent, filled the cockpit. "Passengers are asking, do we tell them more?" The captain's hand hovered over the handset, but Claire shook her head. "I'll do it." She pressed the button, her voice flowing steady once more. "Ladies, and this is Claire again. We are on final approach now. Conditions are challenging, but the aircraft is under full control. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We will be on the ground shortly." She released the button. Her words were few, but they carried what mattered most. Not detail, not promises, but confidence. Behind the door, passengers exhaled, the tension easing slightly. Even without seeing her, they trusted her. Claire hung up the handset, eyes returning to the instruments. "Flaps 25, she said. The captain, his movements smoother now, his trust in her absolute. They descended lower, the storm clawing harder. The aircraft rocked, buffeted by gusts that shoved them sideways. Claire steadied the correction, her hand briefly pressing the controls alongside his, not to take command but to share it. 500 feet, she called out, her voice calm. "Still on slope, keep her centered." His breathing quickened again, nerves pressing in. She leaned closer, her tone firm but steady. "You've got this. Don't chase her, let her fly." For a heartbeat, the cockpit was nothing but storm and silence. Then, faint through the sheets of rain, two lights pierced the dark, the runway blurred but real. Claire's chest tightened, her voice sharp with relief. Runway in sight, continue. The captain's eyes locked on the faint glowing lines. His grip steadied, his shoulders loosened. Together, they guided the massive frame down, closer and closer to the glimmer of safety waiting below. The storm still raged. Rain hammered. Winds fought. But in that cockpit, Claire sat with hands steady, voice calm, every part of her alive again in the skis she had sworn to leave. And for the first time in years, as the ground rose to meet them, she felt something stronger than fear, stronger than regret. She felt purpose. The runway lights flickered through the storm like distant beacons, wavering, blurred by sheets of rain. For a split second, Claire thought of ghosts. How many times she had chased lights through darkness, how many times she had prayed they would hold steady, how many times they hadn't. Her throat tightened, but she shoved the thought down. Focus. Nothing else mattered. 300, she called, eyes locked on the altimeter. Her voice didn't waver, not even as the aircraft jolted sideways, the wind clawing at the wings. Flaps full, speed steady. The captain's knuckles were bone-white against the yoke, but his movements matched her. His eyes darted between the instruments and the faint glow outside, flickering, then vanishing behind rain again. "You're drifting left," Claire snapped, her tone low but cutting. "Rudder right, small correction, that's it." The plane responded, nose aligning, slope captured again. She exhaled softly, though her pulse pounded like thunder in her ears. 200 passengers sat behind them in silence, their fear condensed into the press of bodies gripping armrests, whispered prayers leaking into the air. They couldn't see the battle in the cockpit, the subtle corrections, the warnings silenced by calm hands, the storm clawing at every seam of control. They couldn't see, but they could feel. And they remembered her voice, steady, telling them everything was under control. 200, Claire announced. Centered, glide path good, don't chase it, trust the slope. The captain swallowed hard, sweat streaking his forehead. Feels like she's fighting me. She is, Claire said evenly. Storm's trying to own her, don't let it breathe, small inputs only. His shoulders loosened slightly, the nose steadied, the instruments calmed. Lightning cracked across the windshield, so close it painted the cockpit white. Claire flinched, not from fear of the storm, but from the memory it pulled from her like claws. Another storm, another night. Her wingman's voice breaking mid-sentence, swallowed by static, then silence forever. She saw his face as the sky spun, heard the shriek of metal tearing itself apart. Her hands shook once, just once, before she forced them still. "Not now, not again." 100 feet, she said, voice sharp, dragging herself back into the present. "Flare in 5, hold your line." The runway lights glowed brighter now, shimmering through the rain. The ground surged closer, rushing up at them. Claire's hand rested lightly on the throttle, steady, ready. 50 feet, she called, flare. The captain pulled back gently. The nose lifted. For a suspended heartbeat, the aircraft floated above slick asphalt, weightless against the roar of engines and rain. Then impact. The wheels struck hard, shuddering through the cabin in a bone-deep thud. Tires sprayed water in twin jets, the fuselage rattling as though the storm itself clung to the wings, unwilling to let go. "Reverse thrust," Claire ordered. The captain, engines roaring in defiance. Water streamed, brakes screeched faintly, speed bled away in jolts. Claire's eyes flicked to the airspeed. 70 knots, 50, 30, idle thrust, let her roll. The plane slowed, shuddered, and finally eased into a crawl. Silence fell. In the cabin, passengers sat frozen for a beat, their minds catching up to the fact that they were still alive. Then applause began, hesitant at first, one pair of hands clapping from the middle rows. Then another until it swelled into thunderous ovation. Tears streaked faces, strangers clasped hands, children pressed against windows whispering, "We made it." In the cockpit, the captain sagged back in his seat, chest heaving, eyes wide with the weight of relief. He turned toward her, voice raw, cracking with what he couldn't hide. "If you hadn't been here." Claire shook her head sharply, cutting him off. "We were both here, that's what matters." But inside she knew the truth. Without her hands, her steady voice cutting through the storm, they might not have made it. The thought was heavy, but it wasn't pride that filled her. It was something quieter, something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The aircraft taxied slowly, guided by lights shimmering on the drenched tarmac. Emergency vehicles waited at the edge, their flashing beacons blurred by rain. Paramedics rushed forward, summoned earlier for the co-pilot who still slumped unconscious. Claire removed her headset, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline ebbed. She folded them in her lap, grounding herself in silence. The storm outside still roared, but inside, peace crept in like dawn after a long night. The captain leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the shimmering terminal lights. His voice broke softly. "You saved them." Claire's gaze stayed forward, her tone steady but quiet. "We saved them." Behind them, a flight attendant peeked into the cockpit, eyes glistening with tears she hadn't yet let fall. "They're applauding," she whispered. "They don't know the details, but they know." Claire turned slightly, hearing the faint muffled claps filtering through the closed door. It wasn't for her, not really. It was for survival itself. People had to release relief somehow, and clapping was the only way their hands knew how. The captain turned to her again, disbelief still flickering in his tired eyes. "You should let them know who you are." Claire shook her head, voice soft but firm. "That's not why I stood up." The words silenced him. He saw it then, clearer than before. She wasn't chasing recognition. She wasn't seeking applause. She had stepped forward because she couldn't not. That was who she was and who she would always be, no matter how deeply she tried to bury it. The aircraft came to a final halt at the gate, brakes squealing faintly against wet ground. Paramedics streamed up the jet bridge, voices clipped but urgent, moving quickly to reach the stricken co-pilot. Claire stood quietly, letting them pass, her body aching with exhaustion she hadn't yet allowed herself to feel. She tugged her hoodie back into place, as though pulling on anonymity again. "You're just going to walk out?" the captain asked, incredulous. Claire gave him a steady look, faintest smile tugging at her lips. "That's what passengers do." Then she stepped into the aisle. The cabin erupted again, louder this time, applause swelling like a wave. People craned their necks to see her, whispers darting like sparks. "That's her, row 12, the pilot." Some stood awkwardly, clapping harder, gratitude etched into their faces. Claire kept her gaze forward, her step steady. She didn't bask in it. She didn't slow. She let the sound wash over her without claiming it. Every clap was a release, a way for strangers to process what they couldn't comprehend. For her, it was noise, nothing more. She passed row 12, her seat empty now, a relic of who she'd been only hours earlier. The businessman across the aisle stared at her with awe, laptop forgotten, his mouth half open as though words had failed him. The college kid whispered, "She really did it," like he was telling himself as much as anyone else. She didn't stop, she kept walking. At the forward galley, the lead attendant touched her arm, voice trembling. "I've worked 100 flights," she whispered, "but I'll never forget this one. Thank you." Claire squeezed her hand gently, a quiet answer. "Take care of them, that's what matters." The door opened, rain-scented air rushing in. Passengers filed out slowly, some offering nods, some whispered thanks, some just staring at her in silence. She accepted them all with the same faint smile, never letting it grow into ceremony. Outside, the storm still lashed the tarmac, but above it, stars began to break through the edges of clouds. Claire stepped onto the jet bridge, boots splashing in shallow puddles. The applause faded behind her, replaced by the buzz of waiting families, anxious reunions, the rhythm of ordinary airport life. To them, she was just another traveler, damp from the rain, bag slung over her shoulder. They didn't know. They would never know. and that was fine. The captain caught up briefly, his voice calling after her. "Claire, I don't know if I'll ever see you again, but I won't forget tonight." She turned, meeting his eyes with quiet sincerity. "You don't need to remember me. Just remember what you're capable of when it matters most." Then she slipped into the crowd. The storm clung to the city long after the aircraft rolled to its final stop. Rain hammered the roof of the terminal, beating down in relentless waves as though trying to erase what had just happened. Inside, travelers spilled from Flight 482, dazed, carrying the invisible heaviness of a night they would tell and retell for years. But Claire walked among them like any other passenger, her hood pulled up, her bag slung casually over one shoulder, eyes forward. She moved through the jet bridge as though nothing had happened at all. Around her, whispers followed like shadows. People had pieced together fragments. Row 12, the hoodie, the steady voice over the intercom. Some stared, unsure whether to speak. Others glanced away as if not daring to break the silence she carried. A man muttered softly, "That's her," but his voice was swallowed in the shuffle of feet and rolling luggage. Claire ignored them. She stepped into the terminal, greeted by the usual chaos. Families pressing forward, arms outstretched, children squealing with relief. Some passengers wept openly, collapsing into embraces. Others walked briskly, eyes red, seeking quiet corners where they could breathe again. Claire didn't stop. She didn't search for familiar faces. There were none. She kept moving, her boots slapping against wet tile, puddles spreading faintly with each step. The smell of wet concrete, coffee, and jet fuel mingled in the air. Normal. Ordinary. Yet nothing about tonight was ordinary, and Claire felt it gnawing in the back of her chest. She tried to bury it the way she always did, deep, tight, with the weight of discipline, but the storm inside her hadn't cleared. She stopped briefly near a window. Outside, the aircraft still sat under floodlights, its fuselage slick with rain. Emergency crews swarmed, paramedics wheeling the unconscious co-pilot away, their voices brisk but careful. Mechanics circled, checking for damage from the storm. For everyone else, it was just another diversion, another emergency landing managed. But Claire knew better. She knew how close they had come, how thin the line between survival and disaster had been. Her hands trembled faintly at her sides. She clenched them into fists, forcing stillness. She hated the tremor, hated what it revealed. She turned away from the window. The captain appeared suddenly, jogging lightly to catch her before she vanished into the terminal crowd. His uniform clung damply to him, his shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with something more. "Claire," he called. She paused, barely turning. He slowed, breath catching. I need to say it again, what you did." She shook her head, cutting him off softly. "Don't." He frowned. "Don't what?" "Don't make it something it wasn't," she said. Her tone was calm but firm. "We got them down, that's all that matters." His jaw flexed, struggling against the words he wanted to release. Gratitude, admiration, maybe disbelief still clinging to him. He swallowed instead, nodding once, though his eyes betrayed it all. "You saved us," he whispered. Claire exhaled, shaking her head faintly. "No, we saved each other." Silence stretched. Around them, passengers streamed past, laughter and tears colliding in the air. But between them, the silence was heavier. Finally, the captain's voice softened. "I'll never forget tonight." "You shouldn't," she replied, steady. "But not because of me, because you learned what you're capable of when it matters." Then she turned, slipping into the crowd before he could answer. Her boots carried her toward the exit, every step pulling her deeper into anonymity. She preferred it that way. Recognition was a weight she didn't want. She had no desire for headlines or praise. She only wanted the quiet. But the quiet was where her ghosts waited. The rain-slick air hit her as she stepped outside. The storm hadn't broken yet. Lightning flickered over the horizon, thunder rolling low across the night. She pulled her hood and walked past the line of taxis idling near the curb. Drivers watched her, hopping for fares, but she didn't stop. She walked, boots splashing in shallow puddles, her bag dragging at her shoulder. Every step echoed with memory. The hum of engines, the weight of a yoke under her hands, the sound of a voice that had once filled her headset, her wingman's laughter, sharp and quick, the sound that had vanished in static on a night much like this. She had promised herself she'd never hear static like that again, never feel the sky closing in with that kind of finality. But tonight had dragged her back. The sky had claimed her again, and she had answered. Her breath shook as she walked, though her face remained composed. She hated that part of herself, that after all these years the ghost still owned her, still lived in the silence between breaths. She told herself she was finished, that she had stepped away for good. But the truth pressed in harder than the rain. She would always be a pilot. She could never run far enough from it. She stopped under the awning of a quiet corner outside the terminal. Few people passed here. The storm's hiss filled the silence. She leaned against a pillar, tilting her head back, letting the rain pepper her hood, soaking the edges of her hair. Her hands still trembled faintly. She clenched them again. She wanted to believe she could let it go, that once she walked away from the terminal it would be over. But it was. Her old commander's voice echoed in her head, as clear as if he stood beside her. When you're the one who can move, you don't wait for someone else. It was a creed that had carried her through missions, that had defined her, and tonight it had called her back into the sky she thought she'd abandoned. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. For a moment she let herself feel it all, the fear she'd buried, the weight of lives she'd carried, the ghosts that never left. She let it wash through her like the rain. When she opened her eyes again, the storm hadn't broken, but something inside her had shifted. She hadn't sought tonight. She hadn't wanted it. But fate had put her in row 12, and when the call came, she had risen. She pushed away from the pillar and kept walking, boots splashing, rain soaking deeper into her clothes. Ahead, the city stretched under storm clouds, its lights blurred by rain. Life went on. Families reunited. Taxis pulled away. People hurried toward warmth and beds, unaware that one quiet passenger had held the line between survival and disaster. And Claire disappeared into it all, hood pulled low, face anonymous, heart heavy but steady. Because she knew the truth now, the truth she had always known. Storms would come again. In skis, in lives, in moments when courage was demanded and silence wasn't enough. And when those moments came, no matter how far she tried to run, she would answer. The city was soaked in. Rain slicked across streets, reflecting neon signs and headlights in fractured streaks. Claire walked without hurry, her hood drawn low, her bag hanging from one shoulder, boots splashing through shallow rivers that cut along the curbs. The night had an edge to it, that quiet hum that comes after survival, when the adrenaline drains and silence presses in too close. She should have felt relief. She should have felt triumph even, knowing 200 people were alive because she'd stood. But instead, what filled her chest was something sharper, heavier. Guilt. Memory. The weight of a past she'd tried to bury but which had clawed its way back to the surface the moment she touched the controls again. She turned down a quieter street, away from the terminal's chaos, from families embracing, from clapping hands that meant gratitude she didn't want. The storm hissed above, thunder rolling far off now, moving east. Yet inside her it raged still. She thought of the co-pilot, slumped and unconscious. His chest had risen unevenly, breath shallow against the oxygen mask, alive but helpless. She had seen that before too, in different uniforms, in different skis. Men who'd flown with her, steady one moment, gone the next. And always, always, it was her hands left holding the weight of survival. Her commander's words echoed again. When you're the one who can move, you don't wait for someone else. But what he'd never said was what happened after, what it cost. She stopped under an awning outside a shuttered. Rain streamed down the glass beside her, distorting the dark interior into ripples. She caught her reflection faintly, a hooded figure, jaw hard, eyes hollow. Not the anonymous passenger from row 12, not the Air Force captain she once had been. Something in between, someone torn open by both. Her chest ached with the memory she had been pushing down all night. It rose, unbidden, pulling her back years to a storm over foreign ground. The alarms had screamed in her headset. The sky had spun, clouds tearing in violent swirls. Her hands had fought the yoke, muscles burning, her jaw clenched against the pole. Her wingman's voice had filled her ears, confident, steady, his laugh even cutting through the static as if to remind her that no storm could touch them. Then silence. One heartbeat, his voice there. The next gone, no warning, no farewell, just static. Her eyes had scanned desperately across dark sky, searching for lights, for smoke, for anything. Nothing, just the storm swallowing everything. She had flown through it alone, carried out the mission, landed the plane, given the report. But she had never forgiven herself. Not for surviving when he hadn't. Not for the decisions she had made in those minutes, the ones she replayed endlessly in the quiet hours. She had buried her uniform not long after, shoved it deep into a trunk she never opened. And she had promised herself she would never set foot in a cockpit again. Yet tonight she had. And the part of her she thought was dead had come alive again with brutal ease. Her hands still remembered every dial, every correction, every clipped phrase into a mic. Her voice had found the old cadence without hesitation. Her body had moved as though it had never left, and 200 people had lived because of it. But at what cost? Claire pressed her palms against the cool glass of the window, bowing her head briefly. Her breath fogged the pain, a ghostly imprint that vanished as quickly as it came. She wondered if the passengers had any idea who she really was, not just a woman who could fly, but a woman who carried the ghosts of those she couldn't save. Would they clap so hard if they knew? Would they call her a hero if they'd seen the wreckage she left behind years ago? She doubted it, and she didn't want them to. Her phone buzzed faintly in her pocket. She pulled it free, saw the name flashing across the screen, an old friend, one of the few who knew parts of the truth. She let it ring out. She couldn't find words for anyone yet. Not tonight. Instead, she kept walking. The rain eased slightly, thinning into mist. The city glowed in its reflection, shimmering in puddles. She crossed an empty intersection, her boots clicking softly on wet asphalt. The silence felt oppressive, pressing memories harder against her. For years she had lived quietly, consulting, training, teaching simulations, helping others fly without ever touching the skis herself. It was safer that way, detached, no risk of losing someone again, no risk of feeling that hollow silence in her headset. But tonight proved what she'd feared all along. The skis weren't finished with her. No matter how far she ran, they would find her. She turned down another street, finding herself near a small park. Trees bent under the weight of water, branches dripping steady rivulets. Benches gleamed wet under dim lamps. She sat on one, dropping her bag at her feet, letting the rain soak through her hood now. For once, she didn't resist it. She let it wash over her, cooling her skin, chilling her bones. Her mind replayed the landing in relentless detail, the way the captain's hands had shaken, the way her voice had cut through his fear, the way the runway had finally emerged through the storm. For others, it would fade into memory, into a story told at dinner tables. For her, it was already etched deeper, carved into the same place where the ghosts of the past lived. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped tight. She whispered to the rain, though no one could hear, "I didn't want this." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. A part of her had. A part of her always would. Because no matter how broken she felt, no matter how heavy the guilt, the sky was the only place she had ever truly belonged. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered, lifting it to her ear silently. Claire, the voice was hesitant, male, familiar. Someone who had flown with her once years ago. I saw the news alerts. Diversion, emergency landing. They're saying a passenger stepped in. Tell me it wasn't you. She didn't answer right away. Rain pattered against the speaker, Finally, she whispered, "It was me." Silence stretched, then a sigh, weary but unsurprised. "You can't stay away forever, you know. The sky doesn't let go that easy." Her throat tightened. "I told myself I was done." "You're not," he said simply. "None of us ever are." She closed her eyes, leaning back against the wet bench. The truth of his words stung. He didn't press further, didn't ask for details. He just let the silence carry between them. Finally, she ended the call, lowering the phone to her lap. The park was quiet, save for the hiss of rain on leaves. Claire sat there a long time, the night pressing in, the ghosts crowding close. She hated them, but she also knew they were the reason she had stood tonight. The reason she hadn't let the captain's plea go unanswered. The reason she had put her hands on the controls again when everything in her had screamed to stay hidden. She couldn't erase her past. She couldn't undo what had been lost. But tonight proved something she hadn't admitted in years. Her past wasn't just loss. It was strength too. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to carry both. She rose from the bench, lifting her bag again, rain dripping from her hood. The storm had thinned now, clouds parting to reveal faint glimmers of stars. She looked up at them for a moment, her chest tight. The sky had taken much from her, but it had given her something too, a calling she couldn't deny, no matter how much it hurt. She turned away, walking deeper into the city's glow. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. When the call came again, and it would, she wouldn't stay in row 12. The storm finally broke. By dawn, the city lay slick and shining, the last of the rain dripping from rooftops, steam rising faintly from streets as the first rays of sun reached over the horizon. Claire walked through it quietly, as if the world itself were exhaling after a long night. Her clothes were still damp, her hood heavy with water. She hadn't slept. She hadn't tried. Sleep was a place where ghosts waited, and she couldn't face them again, not yet. Instead, she kept moving. Block after block, street after street, letting the city swallow her, letting motion keep her upright. At a small diner just waking for the morning, she ducked inside. The bell above the door chimed faintly, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the air. The place was empty except for a tired waitress wiping counters, who glanced up and offered a polite nod without recognition. That was good. Claire wanted to be invisible again. She took a seat in the back booth, slid her bag against the wall, and wrapped chilled hands around a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth grounded her, but her mind was still caught between the storm and the silence that followed. Through the window, she watched the city stir to life. Commuters hurried down sidewalks, briefcases in hand, phones pressed to ears. No one knew, or perhaps no one cared, that hours earlier, 200 lives had balanced on a knife's edge above the clouds. That was the strange truth of survival. For those inside it, it was everything. For the world beyond, it was just another headline soon forgotten. The waitress set a plate down in front of her, scrambled eggs, toast, bacon. Claire thanked her quietly and pushed the food around with a fork more than she ate it. Hunger wasn't what gnawed at her. It was the weight of survival. The voices of passengers replayed in her head. The clapping, the whispered "that's her," the flight attendants' trembling gratitude. They had looked at her as if she were something more than human, someone extraordinary, but Claire knew better. She knew the truth that gnawed in the dark corners. Survival was not proof of greatness. It was proof of luck, proof of chance. She had seen better men and women fall beside her, pilots sharper, braver, more skilled, and she had lived. It was a fact she carried like shrapnel. She didn't feel chosen. She felt cursed. Her coffee had gone cold before she touched it again. She took a sip anyway, bitter liquid burning against her tongue. The taste pulled her back to another morning, another diner far from home. Her wingman had sat across from her then, laughing, teasing her about how she drowned her coffee in cream and sugar. He had promised they'd make it through the deployment, that they'd come home whole. But only she had. She closed her eyes, the ache cutting sharp. "I should done more," she whispered under her breath, though no one was listening. The waitress passed by, glancing at her briefly but said nothing. Claire was grateful. She didn't want comfort. She didn't deserve it. Her phone buzzed again on the table. Another alert, news headlines now. Passenger saves flight. Anonymous hero at the controls. Her photo wasn't there, not yet, but she knew it wouldn't take long. Someone would share. Someone would post. The world had a way of dragging the unwilling into light. She turned the phone face down. The truth was, she didn't feel like a hero. Heroes didn't carry ghosts the way she did. Heroes didn't hear static in their sleep, didn't replay decisions over and over until they cut the soul raw. Heroes didn't sit in empty diners at dawn, shaking over coffee they couldn't finish. But as the hours passed, something shifted inside her. For the first time, she asked herself a different question. Not why she had survived, but what survival meant. She thought of the captain's eyes, wide and broken, finding steadiness again only because she'd been there. She thought of the passengers, children clutching their parents, strangers holding hands, lives that would go on because she hadn't stayed in her seat. She thought of the clapping, not as praise but as release, the desperate gratitude of those who had looked death in the eye and lived. Maybe survival wasn't shame. Maybe it was responsibility. Her wingman hadn't lived. Others hadn't either, but she had. And perhaps the cruel truth wasn't that she had been cursed, but that she had been entrusted. Trusted to carry what they couldn't, trusted to rise when others fell. Her throat tightened with the weight of it. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comforting, but it was something she could live with. She sat back, the first light of morning spilling across her face through the window. Outside, the city moved unaware, but inside her, a fragile shift had begun. She reached for her phone again, scrolling past the headlines until she found a message waiting from an old commander. Just 4 words: I heard, I knew. Her chest ached, but she typed back, it wasn't choice, it was necessity. The reply came quick, that's all it ever is. She set the phone down, staring at the words until they blurred. He was right. She had stepped in not for glory, not for recognition, but because the moment demanded it, because she could move when others couldn't, and maybe that was enough. Her coffee was gone by the time she stood. The waitress offered a quiet smile as Claire paid but didn't ask questions. She appreciated that. Questions opened doors she wasn't ready to walk through. Outside, the storm had left the air clean, sharp with the scent of wet asphalt. Claire walked slowly, breathing it in. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest thread of peace threading through the heaviness. Not absolution, not erasure, but something steadier. She knew the ghosts would never leave. She knew the guilt would flare again when she closed her eyes at night. But she also knew now that carrying them wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was the proof she had lived, and with it came the responsibility to act when called. Row 12 had been chance, but standing up hadn't been. That had been choice, and choice was where dignity lived. Claire adjusted the strap of her bag and kept walking, the morning crowd weaving around her. She didn't stand out. No one stopped her. She liked it that way. She didn't need applause or headlines or names etched in newsprint. She only needed to know that when the sky called, she had answered. And maybe, when the call came again, she would be ready, not as penance but as purpose. The sun broke free of the clouds then, streaking gold across wet pavement. Claire tilted her face toward it briefly, letting it warm her skin before lowering her hood. For the first time in a long time, she let herself walk without hiding. She wasn't finished, she never would be, but maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was her place. Airports have a rhythm, one that never sleeps. By afternoon, the terminal had already buried the night's terror beneath new departures and arrivals. Families hugged at gates, business travelers hurried through security lines, luggage wheels clicked across tile. The storm was gone, replaced by bright sunlight streaming through tall glass windows, as if the sky itself had never threatened to devour them just hours earlier. Claire walked through it unseen. Her bag hung from her shoulder, her hood lowered now. Her face showed nothing of the storm she had flown through, nothing of the ghosts she had wrestled. To anyone watching, she was just another passenger moving with the current of strangers, and she preferred it that way. But fragments of recognition lingered. A mother with a child paused when she passed, eyes widening briefly before lowering again, as if sensing but not daring to confirm. A businessman's gaze caught on her for too long, mouth parting as though he wanted to speak. She kept walking. She had no interest in being a story someone told. Near the departure gates, she stopped at a quiet. Rows of papers and screens already carried headlines: emergency landing in storm, passenger steps in. No photo yet, just words. The world knew something had happened, but not who. Claire's chest tightened at the thought that sooner or later her name might surface. She hoped it wouldn't. She didn't need the world to know. She only needed to know she had done what was necessary. She bought a bottle of water, nodding at the cashier who didn't look twice at her. The anonymity was a gift, and she accepted it in silence. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. More messages, more missed calls. Old comrades, curious reporters, numbers she didn't recognize. She left them unread. The weight of words she didn't want hung heavy in her palm until she slipped the phone away again. She found a seat by the window, away from the rush. Outside, aircraft moved across sunlit runways, graceful, powerful, alive. Engines roared, wings lifted, wheels kissed sky. She watched them rise, one after another, her breath shallow but steady. It hurt to watch, it always had, but it also steadied her. Because in those takeoffs she saw what she had been part of, what she still was part of, whether she admitted it or not. She saw defiance against gravity, against storms, against everything that tried to pull life down. And she thought of the passengers she had walked away from, children who would grow older now, parents who would go home, strangers who would return to their lives. They would never know her story. They didn't need to. The captain would remember, she knew. The flight attendants too. And perhaps whispers would spread, passengers repeating the tale of the hooded woman from row 12. But even if it reached headlines, it would fade, as stories always did. And that was fine. Because what mattered wasn't the story. What mattered was the act. Claire closed her eyes briefly, leaning back in her chair. She let the hum of the terminal wash over her, the announcements, the rolling bags, the laughter of families reunited. It felt almost normal, almost ordinary. But deep down, she knew nothing about tonight was ordinary. The ghosts inside her stirred, but softer now. Not gone, never gone, but quieter, less sharp. She carried them as she always would, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel crushed beneath them. Her wingman's voice came back to her, not the silence, not the static, but the laugh, bright and reckless. She let herself remember that part. For once it didn't break her. It steadied her. Because maybe that was what survival meant. Not forgetting, not erasing, but carrying forward what others could not. Her gate announcement called faintly over the intercom. She opened her eyes, lifted her bag, and stood. Another flight, another seat, another row among strangers who would never guess who she was. That was her life now. Quiet, ordinary, hidden in plain sight. And yet she knew, if the moment came again, if a voice crackled overhead asking if anyone could step forward, she wouldn't hesitate. She would rise again, not for thanks, not for recognition, but because some truths can't be buried. As she boarded, she kept her gaze down. Passengers filed ahead, chatting, laughing, unaware. She slid into her assigned seat by the window, set her bag beneath her feet, and leaned back. Through the glass, the runway stretched into sunlight. The storm washed clean from the sky. She closed her eyes, breathing steady, heart steady. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.